You must stay at home. Stay at home.
Hello and welcome to Lockdown, hosted by Steve Bomford with Mike Davis-Marks. Our armed forces operate in challenging environments. Week by week, we'll explore what we can learn from their experiences.
Hi, Steve. I see for the next episode of the Lockdown podcast, you've got another old mucker of mine that I've known during my naval service, Ian Millen.
Yes, indeed. He did acknowledge knowing you, so at least you seem to get on. He's the CEO of Veterans Outreach Support, served in the Falklands on HMS Antrim.
Yeah, I'm always dubious about people that acknowledge that they know me. Most people deny it, but I'm sure it made for an interesting interview. Let's hear it.
Yes, I'm sure it will. I can't tell you the number of people that have refused to do it because of your involvement. No, of course, I jest. But anyway, let's have a little listen to what he's got to say. You joined the Royal Navy as a junior seaman and left as a commander 30 years later. Has your career in the Navy influenced your perspective on life?
Well, I would say massively. As you say, 30 years in the RN. I joined as a schoolboy and I left in my mid-40s. And by the time I'd done that, I had a wife, I had 3 children. I'd served across the world in ships and submarines. I'd lived in other countries. None of us like to be defined by a single chapter or a single role in life. And as I've just unpacked there are lots of different roles, whether that's a father, a husband, a serviceman, all those kind of things. And I operated in other areas after I left the Navy, which was about 13 years ago now, in a serious organised crime agency. So in the public service, in the commercial world, in a local company, and third sector in other areas. But now as a third sector in a third sector charity. But if you think that my naval career represents about 3/4 of my working life, then it's bound to influence you in many ways. I like that TV ad that you've probably seen on the television recently. And for me, it kind of reads, born in Preston, made in the Royal Navy. But I'd like to extend that in the spirit of the fact that in VOS, we support veterans of all 3 services and the Merchant Navy as well, to the fact that I was born in Preston but made in the UK Armed Forces, because it's much bigger than just your own single service. You know, I can banter with the best of them when it comes to single service banter, and of course telling the other services just how brilliant the Navy is, and that's all very good fun. But at the same time, I recognise the sort of interconnectedness of us all and why we all rely upon each other. So I think one of the biggest influences on me has been the team mentality and collaborative approach that I've built over the years, and a recognition, I think, that the biggest challenges are best done together. I particularly like that African proverb that if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And with that in mind, you know, the way that we operate at VOS, as I'm sure that we'll get to discuss, is very much a team approach. In the forces, you are part of something bigger than yourself, and you have this real sense of belonging, which is great. It's great comfort. It's a good place to be. And in the forces, you're a member of a team. Now, that's not just the Royal Navy in my case. It's joint services. It's government at times when you're involved in international operations, coalitions where you're working with other nations, etc. But one really big thing is that in the forces, in your ship, in your unit, or wherever you're working, it's a situation where you are relying upon the man or woman at your side just as much as they're relying upon you. So it's a very connected team approach. Outside of any kind of work, that's why I like Formula One, and because of the fact that you've got one driver at the front end of all this, but you've got this huge team behind them, often hundreds of people that go right back to the factory, to the person doing the carbon fiber adjustment to the front wing and things like that. And it's why I love the quote from NASA about how, when asked, a guy who was sweeping a corridor, you know, what do you do? And he said, well, I'm putting a man on the moon, because they were part of that team that was doing it. And And if I can have my own indulgence of a Voss metaphor for this, I've often said that we are a big family. That's not just our staff, but it's our volunteers, it's our delivery partners, all kinds of people, from our trustees. And I'd often use the phrase, and I did it one time in front of one of our volunteers, and I said, here, we're a family, and we are the, from the trustee to the tea lady. And the lady I was talking to is a lady that looks after all the biscuits, the tea and the coffee for when we welcome our veterans into our drop-ins. And she corrected me. She said, actually, Ian, I'm a beverage supervisor, which I thought was a great point. But my point stands in that we are really much a very, very much joined up a team. I think the other thing that being in the Navy for so long taught me was to be a bit more tolerant. You can't live in a mess deck of 65 men, as I did, and they were all men at the time, in a mess deck there, and as a junior seaman and as a junior rate generally, without being tolerant of others. You can't later operate with other branches of service or conduct international operations in coalition without understanding and being tolerant of the people that you're working with. And we have a saying in the Navy that goes something like, you've got to walk a mile in somebody else's flip-flops to understand what their perspective and where they're coming from. An adaptation of shoes, of course. But I think that's is particularly relevant to me because I think I've walked in lots of different flip-flops over the years, and including within my own career. And you said that I joined the Navy at one end and left at the other, and I had a great privilege, and it was a great privilege of having a career that was roughly spent 50% of it as a rating and 50% of it as an officer. And that insight has given me an opportunity to see things from both sides and multiple perspectives, which is always a help, I think. That doesn't mean that anybody that joins as a rating and stays as a rating, or somebody that joins an officer and stays an officer as any less valuable in any way. And you've had certain people, even on this podcast, who join the Navy as an officer, and is a tremendous individual and a great leader and all those kind of things. But for me, I feel it's both a great privilege and an advantage to have those multiple perspectives. So if I'm in a drop-in and I'm 1 minute I'm talking to or trying to influence somebody in a briefing before the drop-in to tap into their time or their treasure or their talent from a local company or from a government entity, that's one thing, that's being there. But then switching that and being on the floor talking to one of our service users who might have been a private soldier and who I do have an awful lot in common with, and being able to sort of span those different areas is a great advantage in many ways, and one that many people have, regardless of whether they've spent it as a split career as I did or whether they've been at either end. But it's really good to have this great privilege. The best way I can describe it. I struggle to think of any other kind of words. And I think the other area that has been an influence on my perspective in life by being in the forces is that just realizing and recognizing the things that are really important in life, and they're not generally material things, but they're human things, the relationships and things. In terms of family, there is nothing harder than being separated from them, and there's nothing sweeter than being reunited. And people in the armed forces have got an awful lot of this separation, and had to get used to that. And interestingly, with the lockdown situation we've been in, millions of people across the UK are actually feeling this pain acutely because they're also in a situation where they're separated from their families in many ways, in a more severe way, because it's something that they never anticipated. Not being able to see your mum and give her a hug, not being able to see your children or your friends. It's so everybody is now getting a feeling for what that's like. But family is really central to my influence, certainly, and that's why at Voss as well, that we think of the family. We don't just support veterans; we support their close family too. And friends. I think that friends in the armed forces, or camaraderie as it's often worded, which is stronger in many ways. I must say it's hard to explain that feeling, but it's a special kind of friendship that's kind of born out of shared experience, heritage, sometimes born out of danger. And in our charity, we find that it's this is the real social glue that binds everything together. It helps us to help people that need our help. It's that wider sense of belonging I mentioned earlier on, but it's something bigger than yourself that, that massively influences the way that we do our business. So I think that those are the key areas, really. It's that team mentality and the collaborative approach. It's tolerance and empathy, and it's focus on the things that really matter.
Thank you. I'm going to take a guess that your beverage supervisor was Penny. You don't have to answer that question. It just sounds like the sort of thing she might say.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
A good response, a very good response. We can talk about that another time. And I do particularly like the NASA analogy. That's something I'm quite obsessed with. But this idea that you've got maybe 200,000 people to get two guys onto the moon, and obviously all the subsequent missions. I think it's fascinating. People don't often appreciate in the armed forces how many people it takes to get a ship at sea or deploy a battalion or what have you. There's an awful lot of people involved in that, and it's not just all frontline service by any stretch of the imagination. That's been a learning for me, for sure.
I think it's absolutely true, Steve. And I think if you look at Voss, because you've been and are one of our delivery partners. When you think that we've got roughly 40 different delivery partners from various charities and organisations, 30 to 40 solid volunteers, our own staff, it's a massive team effort, and we just could not do it, as I'm sure we'll come on to talk about, without everybody pulling together in that way. So it's a comfortable place to be. It's back to that sense of belonging and that feeling that this is much bigger than you.
Definitely. Talking of much bigger than you, you served during the Falklands conflict on board HMS Antrim. Could you tell me a little bit about that experience, please?
Yeah, sure. And I should say that in terms of Voss, and probably part of the reason at least that I found my way into this great role of being part of the team at Voss is because of the Falklands, because Voss was established after the 25th anniversary of the Falklands, after a Falklands pilgrimage by a number of people, and to this day there is quite a strong cohort of people who are either service users or volunteers that were involved in the Falklands as well. But I'm very conscious it's almost 38 years ago. Well, it is 38 years ago now. So this is a bit like talking to a World War II veteran in 1983. So it spanned quite a little bit of time, and sometimes memories fade, but certain things don't. But I was on a ship called HMS Antrim. It was a beautiful ship with beautiful lines, designed in the days before stealth technology, so none of these awkward angles and things that are so necessary in modern times. And it was a guided missile destroyer. So its normal role would be to be part of a carrier task group, to be in places like the North Atlantic or the Norwegian Sea with a medium-range missile system that was really aimed at tackling Soviet bombers, high altitude, all those kind of things. So everything was focused on that, working in a task group in such situations. And we had a massive missile on the back called the Sea Slug that was intended to do this. It ran about the magazine about 3/4 of the length of the ship, and then we had the normal self-defense. And my particular action station was in the main fire control center for the 4.5-inch gun, and so obviously I was quite busy for a fair portion of the Falklands. But I think that's an important kind of scene setter because of then what we went on to do. At the time of the invasion, like many, we were sort of taken quite by surprise at the time, especially if you were a young junior like I was at the time, just a leading seaman, and if you weren't a sort of studier of either naval history or of good level of geography, then, in common with most of the UK population, when they heard that the Falklands was invaded, you probably thought it was somewhere off the Shetlands, and not realising quite where it was. So that was the first surprise. Thankfully, our senior officers and those that needed to know did know, and we were dispatched from Gibraltar at the time, actually, because we were involved in a big exercise. And we, on my particular ship, with our captain Brian Young, we were dispatched to go ahead of the task force while all the attention was on the massive effort of getting it sailed from the UK to recapture South Georgia, which is about 1,000 miles from the Falklands. I must confess that on the way there, most of us were thinking this would all be resolved diplomatically. There was a lot of excitement in some ways, and in other ways, resignation by some, and just like always, and I think it's relevant to what we do in Voss, that people react and experience things in many, many different ways. But I think we all thought that it wasn't going to go ahead until much later on in the situation. So there are two main areas that my ship was involved in particular, a great raft of task force operations where we were in company with others. But the two main areas really was first the operation to recapture South Georgia, and then the second was the main amphibious landings on the 21st of May in San Carlos Water. And I have to say, in football terms, that this really was a game of two halves, as I'll explain. The task force that went to South Georgia, just a small number of ships and Royal Marines, SAS that were embarked. Our job was to deal with the Argentine garrison that was on the island there, and we did this in quite a sort of boys' own exciting operation. I think I can sort of legitimately say that because of the fact that, with one sad exception, that it managed to be carried out without loss of life, and everything from losing 2 helicopters on a glacier that was inserting SAS and having to rescue those guys from our ship with our own helicopter, through to the first anti-submarine action by helicopters against a submarine when we disabled an Argentine submarine on the day that then the invasion had to go ahead, and the firepower demonstration that we put on. And this is where I got busy for not for the first time, but so I got very busy with our 4.5-inch gun. The firepower demonstration that then resulted in the Argentine forces ashore running up the white flag without loss of life, which was tremendous. So the one sad exception to all of that was the fact that on the Argentine submarine, in a mistaken view of what one of the crew was trying to do when the submarine was being moved after it had returned to Gripvik, and sadly an Argentine sailor was shot dead. So aside from that, the whole operation was without loss, and really a sort of, compared to what was about to follow, was really exciting, and not something that was, well, let's just say it was one-sided. It was one-sided once things happened, and that's not to downplay the fact that for days we knew that there was a submarine in the area somewhere. The weather was appalling. In fact, I would say it many times that the weather was a greater threat than the enemy. And but that said, it was rather one-sided. But it didn't take long for the mood to change, and I think the facts that made the mood change were, firstly, from our perspective, was the sinking of the General Belgrano with great loss of life that we now know on board there. But what that prompted in the reaction to that, and the then loss of HMS Sheffield. And I think Sheffield's loss was the thing that really sort of hit most people hard. It all got very real, even though we had been involved in a real operation. It became very real at that stage, and as you know, went on to be a lot more real in so many ways. So the main landings that we were then involved in, and having snuck into San Carlos Water and under cover of darkness, and started to bombard some of the Argentine positions in the morning, still under cover of darkness. we knew that on a day when the skies were clear and started to get light, that we were now within range of Argentine shore-based aircraft from the mainland that could get to where we wanted, and great testament to the Argentine pilots and their bravery. They did just that at the very limits of their range, and we came on. It was only a matter of time before we came under attack, and it was very memorable for many people, and it was a great insight, albeit not a very pleasant one at the time, but a very great insight into how one reacts in a situation like this. You ask most people, they'll probably tell you in such a situation, just the same as any kind of conflict like this, that it's a pretty scary place to be. There was a lot of air attack from the Argentine Air Force. There was so in our own situation, we then had another first when we fired the first. Remember that missile Sea Slug I mentioned earlier? We took the first shot with that in anger against an aircraft that was attacking us. Unfortunately, we missed, although we didn't anticipate that in those kind of conditions, which were very, very different to those that I mentioned earlier. We weren't at open sea in the North Atlantic with clear horizons and everything. We were in a small piece of water. We were trying to get a landing force ashore. We were surrounded by hills, and aircraft were popping up over the tops of these hills, and it was almost impossible for many of our radars to lock on. And I think that having fired the Sea Slug missile and the guns that we operated and our own self-defense missiles in overtime, a 1,000-pound bomb went into our ship and went through actually the missile launcher that launched the missile at the aircraft in the first place, or certainly one of the aircraft. Ripped through the missile magazine, the one I was telling you, that ran about 3/4 length of ship that was full of missiles, and ended up being deflected and in the after heads, or as we say, the toilets of the ship, just under the flight deck, and it came to rest. Mercifully, it didn't go bang, and that was the case, as you know, from many other instances in the Falklands where bombs had hit ships and didn't explode. Sadly, that wasn't always the case. And that was the biggest thing in terms of the damage to our ship that took place, and it put us in quite a difficult position. We were very fortunate that on board Antrim we didn't have any loss of life, but we did have some tragic injuries, and our chief of the flight, for example, was blinded in a strafing run across the flight deck, and we had various other injuries, none of them life-threatening, I'm glad to say, but we never stopped thinking about somebody that lost their sight or had more serious, or not. It's hard to think of more serious injury, but had injuries similar to that, of which there were many, not necessarily on my ship. But I think also another kind of connection to Voss here is that we're all sort of hoping and praying for the Sea Harriers, to like the cavalry, to sort of come to the rescue, as we were really under severe air attack in San Carlos, and they did, and they came along, and history will tell you that they were very successful in what they did. But an interesting connection to Voss in this day is that one of the pilots that was overhead in one of those Sea Harriers, in a change of life that one wouldn't expect, he's now one of the psychologists that looks after our service users in Voss. And another kind of sad connection between sad but happy in many ways, but a sad connection between the Falklands and Veterans Outreach Support is that about 3 weeks later, in the Battle of Mount Longdon, a young parachute regiment private, Neil Gross, who was on it was actually his 18th birthday, was killed in the battle for Mount Longdon. And 25 years later, it was this young soldier's mum, Anne Townsend, so one of our founders that co-founded Voss, and she's a constant reminder for us of the sacrifice that many people make, and why we need to do what we do. But it's not all conflict, of course. So it's hard to sort of put into words what that day was like. It's hard to put into words the contrast between the two operations, but it was terrifying in many ways, because the odds were very clear and the odds weren't on our side. So I know now what it feels like to think like you're going to die. I know about the things that you think about when you're in that position. But I also marvel about how we rise to the occasion, how we work on instinct, and how your level of alertness makes you do your job like you've never done it before, and how you connect with the people around you and how you rely upon them and they rely upon you. But I know it's a fine line between being able to do that and being debilitated either at the time or later by the kinds of things that you see and the kinds of emotions that you feel. So being now in the wonderful position of being one of the lucky ones that came through that unscathed, but I would say not unmoved, and to have veterans that were involved in those kind of things who perhaps have struggled more, and to be able to help them as a team at Voss is a really big thing. So, you don't forget something like the Falklands and or any other military operation that many have been involved in. But I should stress that we are not here just for veterans, and this is one of the things we need to overcome. That people think of veterans as people who've been, chest full of medals, been involved in war and everything else. But I remind all the listeners that a veteran is somebody that served one day in uniform, and you don't have to have been in an operation or anything like that. You're a veteran. You signed that check, that metaphorical check you often hear about, that to your government and your nation, that signs you up for a cost that may may lead to your life. And therefore, everybody that's made that commitment, we're there to help. So yeah, the Falklands was a big deal in my life, and it did shape the way that I've thought for many, many years after, and to this day. And in many ways, it shaped the fact that that having seen an opportunity to go and give something back to the people that I care about in Voss, it's been a tremendous opportunity.
Thank you for that, Ian. That's the first time I've been told kind of quite the links that Voss, which, as you know, as you've already said, we come to every month, and its links back into the Falklands conflict. And very, very interesting that the organisation's kind of built on that lived experience, including your own, built upon that lived experience. I think that's fascinating. I'd like to move on to talk a little bit more about Veterans Outreach Support and how it's being impacted. I mean, the organisation has thrived and succeeded as very much a face-to-face organisation. But of course, we have a friend called COVID-19 that kind of has had a massive impact upon any form of face-to-face activity. And I'm just wondering, how has that impacted Voss and the people you support? And kind of also, what have you been able to do about it?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think like for I would say for the country, but for the world, COVID-19 coronavirus has been a strategic shock, and it's been a strategic shock for us in Voss as well. You rightly say that we're very much a face-to-face organisation. In many ways, since Voss was established back in 2007, it has been the thing that has set us apart from many other kinds of provision of help for veterans. Our USP, or unique selling point, if you like, in business terms, is all about the personal touch. It's about the social glue that I mentioned earlier. The drop-ins that we run both here in Portsmouth and on the Isle of Wight are characterised by lots of people coming together. And a recent drop-in, we had more than 80 people through the door seeking help. Those 40 delivery partners I mentioned, 30 odd volunteers. We had as we always do, have the access to the mental health clinics on the day, or mental health triage on the day, and things like that. And it's very much a face-to-face, shake of the hand. How can we help you? And whatever that help that is required is delivering that individual on that day, on that afternoon, to somebody that can help them out, whether that's a welfare issue, a well-being issue, whether it's speaking to a mental health professional. We can do that on that day. And our other activities, such as the kind of, whether it's mental health clinics that follow, with people having appointments, whether it's the activities that we run where we bring people in to do creative writing or painting, get people in a room, get them sort of mixed in a social environment and get them to do some creative things, or take them out sailing for the day, or to a local museum. All those kind of things are obviously curtailed right now. And we also have social groups that we developed over the last 18 months or so, where we're bringing people together. There's one in Stubbington, for example, we call Brew, Butty and Banter, because it involves drinks and teas and coffees. It involves bacon or sausage butties, depending on which you prefer. And it involves a heck of a lot of banter, which I think I mentioned earlier. All of this is about bringing people together, and rather than signposting necessarily, which is a perfectly valid thing to do, but by giving somebody a telephone number, a web address, anything like that, we have the ability to kind of put our hands on people's shoulders and say, this is the person you need to speak to. Meet Joe, meet Jane. This is the person that can help you with what you need. Well, COVID came along, didn't it? And I said it was a strategic and is a strategic shock for many of us. And even the venues that we use for this, the Royal Maritime Club in Portsmouth, the Riverside Centre in Newport and the Isle of Wight, closed. And government restrictions on how many people can be around, a duty of care to our own staff and our clinicians, means that we just had to, in pretty short order, as the rest of the country did, had to really stop doing what we were doing in the way that we were doing it. Even our delivery partners that came from all over various charities, they had their own restrictions placed upon them, and therefore, and our volunteers as well. So, many of them, of course, were quick to say, "I'm here. Whatever you need me to do, just let us know. We'll do what we can." And the same with the delivery partners. But many of them had to close down their own operations. So how it impacted upon us was quite severely, really. And our thoughts were, in particular, how can we deal with the most vulnerable people, the most vulnerable of our service users, because there's quite a spectrum from those that are in quite some really, really challenging circumstances, and they could be people that are being helped out by our clinical team, right through to people that come along for a cup of tea and a custard cream, and for the camaraderie that goes with it. And don't underestimate that last bit, of course, because how many people have been stuck in their own homes without the ability to do that just recently. So that was the first priority, how we're going to help them, support them. And we shifted very quickly to telephone and online methods, and we were very surprised at the success of that, and how much people have related to and been happy with that. And then the second thing really was about how can we keep on serving the sort of welfare side, and using our partners and the telephone. So where our delivery partners, day by day, week by week, started coming in and saying, right, if anybody needs anything, get in touch with us here, and everything else. So we did that too. And then I suppose the third thing really was, how can we in some way reinstitute our activities in our social groups? We needed to do, because my biggest fear was that we can't afford to lose touch with the people. And yet, when you looked at the way that Voss did its business, the conduit and the main referral path for anybody coming and accessing anything that we did was literally to walk through the door. So in terms of our digital comms, we just kind of needed a metaphorical billboard, something that said, come here on the first Wednesday of the month, or the third Wednesday in the Isle of Wight, and join us, and if there's anything you need, we'll help you with it. But come the lockdown, of course, then many of the people that used to do that on a regular basis, or any new people coming along, didn't necessarily they didn't have the ability to go and do that. And our communication and outreach from a sort of digital sense and other senses just wasn't really there in the way that it needed to be. Very few people needed to leave their email addresses with Voss, because they came along on a Wednesday and we saw them, and we know where they live, but they didn't have that. So we adapted to that too, and we thought about we went to the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust, and I have to say that they have been fantastic with us and with other charities in helping us to deal with this transition. We sort of had some funding, or have some funding to adapt to this new normal, if you like, and where we could do things. So Zoom, buying Zoom licenses, doing things like telephone befriending, because technology at the telephone end is perfectly good, and many of our service users won't necessarily have a computer and a way of accessing Zoom and things like that. So we need to address an awful lot of people. And in the longer term, we will adapt to these new ways of working with better digital comms, the telephone befriending. The project that we've got for this is called Click and Connect, which is obviously a sort of a different set of words from something that we've all learned to know and love in lockdown times of click and collect. But I have to say, it hasn't. I'd be fibbing if I said it was a very smooth transition. We just shifted over to online. No, it has been a shock to the system. I think we've adapted well to it, but it has been a challenge. And if I think now, we, like any time, after the initial shock, you start to work your way out of things. We've got online groups that are running now, which I said originally we called Brew, Butty and Banter. Well, now you have to bring your own butty and your own brew, but we still have the banter. And I'm pleased to say, and I won't advertise on a podcast, but we've been very well supported by the local supermarket that actually delivered biscuits and cakes to the participants' homes, to their doors. And it's been tremendous, because then, at least we've got brew, butty and biscuits.
I'm quite happy for you to say who the supermarket was if they're doing good.
Oh, yeah?
Okay.
Right.
As long as it's not libelous or slanderous, we're fine.
No. Okay. Well, we have been very well supported, in this case by ASDA. And in the past, we've had great support from Tesco and others as well. The local community have been tremendously kind in what they provided to us before lockdown and during lockdown. So having a packet of ginger nuts from ASDA delivered to your door, in one case with some wool, so that we could all start making poppies and having a chat online. It's been a really great thing, actually. So we've done that. We've also managed to get the activities back off the ground as well. So where we might have had a thing called Paint and Chill, we bring people into the Royal Maritime Club, sit them in a room with a teacher, and they all have their canvas and their paints, and they talk through how to put a painting together. Clearly, we can't do that. So we adapted. And that same instructor was able to set up a Zoom call, and we were able to deliver all the materials, the paint, the canvas, anything that the users needed to them at their home addresses. And then they would conduct this online, and so they would do it, and tremendous results that have come out of this. The same with creative writing, and we've got an activity program now that's quite busy and filling up fast. So we have adapted to it, but the impact upon the veterans themselves, of course, many more have become more isolated. Those that I said that we haven't got ready access to, of course. We need to reach those too, and I think talking on a podcast like this is a good way of getting the word out. Probably a bit more of that later on. But in terms of the veterans themselves, they've still got the same challenges that they had before, the ones that we were helping them with before COVID, but also some new ones, I would suggest, as a result of COVID. So people have still got the same welfare issues, and it could be finance and debt, unemployment, addictions, homelessness, and housing, and of course some of those, especially the kind of employment side, debt side, and everything. These are all potentially exacerbated by COVID, and we need to be prepared for that. I think also importantly on the well-being side, the loneliness, the isolation, not being able to come and have that custard cream and that cup of tea and have a chat with somebody that's from your service or from the armed forces or with one of our volunteers, that's a big deal. And this is something that's likely to be more complex as time goes on. So the quicker we can get back to the way we did things, the better. But we know enough to know that that is unlikely to be on the scale that we had before. So we need to have these alternate ways of doing things. And the veterans will continue to face the same kind of challenges they did before. I often refer to it as 3 C's. One is complexity of the landscape. It's a complex world out there, and navigating your way to the right help is a challenge. The capacity of some of the pinch points. Statutory services aren't able to do everything quickly necessarily. There's a lot of demand, and therefore, waiting lists are out there, and we've been able to help with that before. And also, there's the issue of continuity of services. I talked to people recently about things like combat stress having funding restricted and not being able to do some of their things, or locally Portsmouth, Age UK and their Joining Forces program was curtailed because of funding. Well, hopefully that will get off the ground again now, hopefully with some money. But we helped people physically to do all those things. We helped them navigate. We walked them across to that person and said, this is the person who can help with you. We have our own capacity, our own clinical team, our own volunteers, our own delivery partners that can help people. And we've always been there. So all those kind of things that we had, all those challenges have now become more difficult. But we've got to find ways of being able to safely and gradually return to those, but at the same time be able to have alternative ways of working like we're doing now.
Interesting. I was going to ask you about, do you think technology is the right tool to address things like social isolation? I think from your answer there, clearly you do think it has a role to play. I'm just wondering how you imagine the future of that to be, or do you think there are things that could be done better that are missing in terms of the support that's available for veterans and the wider community of the military family? And what role does technology play in all of that? Because I'm sure if we'd have asked this question 6 months ago, you'd said, yes, I think there are things that we could do better. But of course, COVID has changed that landscape as well, hasn't it? So quite a complex question. So what could be done differently, smarter or better to support our military communities?
Well, I think on the technology front, it's clear that we've used technology and we've got a long way to go in using that smarter and better and all those kind of things. But I should say on the technology front that it is very much a means to an end. It's a tool, as you related, and a very powerful one. But it's not the only tool. And most of us in our homes have got toolboxes, and we've got toolboxes because rarely does a single tool do every job. And the same is true of with technology. And if I relate back to my days in the armed forces, we used to relate to things in an effects-based way. So what effect are we trying to create here? And of course, the effect we're trying to create is we want to connect with unmet need and veterans. We want to gain their trust. We want to give them some hope. We want to offer them some help. Now, whether we do this through a Zoom call or a letter that flops onto their doormats, by somebody here in a podcast perhaps, or even through the local press, we've got to find lots and lots of different ways to do it. And technology is at the core of some of that, but not all of it. And I think it's particularly valid with VOS to need these other methods, because if you look at our demographic of the almost 2,000 service users that have been registered with VOS over time, 78% of them, so almost 4/5 of them, are over 41, and half of them are over 55. So we do have some of our service users that, as I said earlier, don't necessarily have access to technology in the same way that it's not always the case. It's a generalization, but many younger veterans may have. So we need to find all kinds of ways of getting out to people with that technology. So it is a means to an end, and that's why I think somewhere like a mid ground that most people, and I think it's fair to say most people will have a telephone, and the plain old telephone is a way of getting through and getting to help people, which is why we're going to focus on telephone befriending. But in terms of the what's missing, what could be done better, I think I'd sort of relate back to the things I mentioned earlier, that if we look at when Voss was set up in 2007, there wasn't really anything meaningful. Of course, the sort of traditional and long-standing charities were still doing their thing, but in terms of the kind of support that I'm talking about, there really wasn't anything there where somebody could walk off the street and go get some help in a variety of areas, and certainly, and still the case today, walk in and be sitting in front of a mental health professional that day, that afternoon. We're still able to do that, but there wasn't a huge amount of help around back in 2007 when Voss was set up. But one thing I do know is the case now is that there is lots of help available. There's a heck of a lot of help available out there. But going back to this issue of complexity, the trick is in how do you get to it? How do you understand? How do you navigate that really complex landscape to get there? So I think that the more, what can we do better and smarter? The more collaboration we can do, taking competition out of the third sector and the charity sector generally, and working together more is the way to go. The thing we can do better with capacity is to reinforce that where possible. And another real pinch point that relates to capacity, and I've just said that there's lots of help out there. There is lots of help. We've got veterans charities that have got monies and other services to help service users. But often the logjam is in the kind of casework. The people that can come out and can talk to you and understand your issues and what you need and everything else. Well, most of those are volunteers, and there aren't nearly enough of them. So we need more and more people that can do that, and this will certainly shape our thinking in the future. And then I think the third thing that we can do better and smarter is to really focus on sustainability. Most charities right now, including us, we're looking to the future. We've had this wonderful help from short-term funding and thing to make sure that we don't just disappear, but the long-term sustainability. Most of the people that we were hoping to look to for our longer term sustainability, the business community and all those others, the big charities, well, they've all got their own issues now. The business community is taking a massive strategic shock themselves. They need to focus on their own survival. The big charities are swamped by demand from all kinds of people now who are going to have all these new issues that we're talking about. So it's important that we find ways of being more sustainable, really, and adapting to the new circumstances, as I said. So I think those are those are the sort of things that spring to mind. You're talking about technology and talking about what can we do better. Of course, we can always do better. I think the point I'd like to leave on that subject is that if you were to compare where we are today compared to where we were 11, 12 years ago, it's night and day. And the largest frustration for me is knowing that there is so much that can be done. There's so much help out there, but it's reaching that unmet need. Nothing would keep me awake more at night than thinking about somebody that's sat in a home somewhere who needs our help, but either doesn't know that we exist and we don't know who they are.
Yeah, definitely. I think the telephone, it's like a piece of technology that we have forgotten about, and it is quite a powerful technology, isn't it? I love technology, I have to be honest, but I really struggle with video calls with people that I don't know or haven't met. And I think, if you're new to technology, that might actually be that might be exacerbated a little bit. But I think the telephone is definitely a very useful piece of technology, because you're absolutely right. 90% of the population has at least got a telephone, even if it's just an ordinary feature phone that doesn't have access to the internet. So I think that's weirdly, stepping back is probably not such a bad idea at all. There's a word that I suppose when we started, Company Makers started, that we got introduced to, which is in military circles, the word transition. We hear it so many times and in quite lots of different contexts. And I think, weirdly, transition is going to be affecting everybody now for all the reasons we've already discussed. What does it mean to you, especially in the context of this world that we're now living in? What does transition mean now?
Well, I think firstly, I agree with you. It's a word, much used word, and there's a reason for it being a much used word, because it is we are affected by transitions in our lives all the time. And in the specific context of COVID, of course, that we not only do we transition into a lockdown in very quick time, but we're also now talking about transitioning out of the lockdown and getting back to whatever the another oft-used phrase, the new normal, looks like. We know that we've got to do that safely. But what we do know is that we do need to transition back to something that is more akin to the world that we knew before COVID. And hopefully there are lots of activities that are going on now, whether it's a search for a vaccine, whether it's the control measures that are put in place to help deal with the spread and everything else. But we're human beings. We need to have that human connection, and never more strongly was that the case with an organisation like VOS. So we know we need to do that now. Transition back to a place, obviously with all the kind of plan Bs that we'll have in place should we need to do it to get back to where we are. But I think on a wider note, and this is something that I've thought about a lot in it's coming up for my almost 2 years at VOS now, and having seen the various issues that people present with, the help they need and everything else. And it sort of occurs to me that transition of one sort or another seems to be at the core of nearly all the problems that we have in life. Whether that is transitioning from a position where you've been married for years and you lose a partner, so you're bereaved, whether it's divorce, whether it's a change of career, whether it's an end of career in retirement, or a change in your financial status. I think if you were to do a kind of root cause analysis on many of the problems that we all encounter, and we do all encounter them, and I've encountered issues myself over time, in some of those areas, that you would end up going back to the issue that this is a transition issue, if you like, and I think that the way that people can be helped with transition, and it's as true for COVID as it is for some of these other more general things, is sometimes what you need is just somebody put a hand on your shoulder, somebody to point you in the right direction, and help you with something. Now some of those transitions can be very severe, and some of the, if you take mental health for example, some people that present with things like PTSD, it's got a very long incubation period as an average. Obviously sometimes it can be there straight away, but for some people, and I've seen examples of this where they've had very busy lives, they've been involved in something that's quite life-changing, such as conflict or any one of these other things. It doesn't have to be conflict, of course, but they're busy career, busy raising a family, all those kind of things. They reach retirement age, they have an opportunity to sit back, relax, reflect, and then sometimes these kind of things start coming back to me, and it sort of it becomes a problem. And I do think that just being there to help at a time of transition is what we're kind of all about. As I said, we do the root cause, and it's going to be the root cause of many of these things. And I think the more that we can seek to find different ways of helping people through this, and we do it through our delivery partners, through the volunteers, through our staff, just helping people get from one place to another. I heard something. I'm not too proud to steal things off other people when I hear something good. And I heard one of our service users talk to me recently about how he had it was actually a medical problem, a physical problem, and I'm sure you wouldn't mind me saying, but where had gone and had a sort of an operation that was needed for a sort of knee problem, and he'd gone to see this physician that was there to help veterans, and when he walked in the room, having had a long painful journey of not having this problem fixed, and this guy just said to him, he said, "Okay, sit down." He said, "Before we go anywhere, before we say anything further, we've got you." And he said how powerful that was. Just hearing that, we've got you. So I've used that with other people since then, and it is transformative in the effect that it has on people, and it's what we're all about, really. It's, we, because can we guarantee 100% of the issues or problems that people have that we'll be able to fix them? No, we don't know that. But I've been there long enough now to see the people who have transitioned from a very bad place to a very good place. And I think in VOS terms, despite what's happened with COVID, the message that I want to get out to people, anybody that needs us, anybody that thinks they know somebody that would need us, if only they knew about us, is that that we are still here, and that if you come and see us or get in touch with us, we'll say that too. We've got you, because we know we can help. We've seen it so many times, and we've seen things that have turned people from desperation into a much better place. And it's not all that. It's not all about sort of hardcore, terrible situations. Sometimes people just want a little bit of companionship, and it can transform their lives. I've seen it. I've witnessed it. That's why we've gone into doing more of the social stuff, because sometimes that's all they need. It's just a little bit of companionship, back to that camaraderie, back to that sense of belonging, and that being part of something that's bigger than yourself. So our message is that we're still here, that we've got you, that we can help you. We can help you get to that better place, and we'd be delighted to do that. And we would consider it, back to that veteran and that blank check, and my own experience as somebody that has served in the forces, that has transitioned well into other life, that has been one of the lucky ones. I would consider it, and I know all my colleagues consider it to be the greatest privilege to be able to help get somebody and their families to that better place.
I agree. It's so easy to underestimate the impact of being told that someone is there for you, looking after you, got your back, whatever phrase you like. I think that's really, really important. And I think if people are interested or have problems or know someone that has some challenges in their lives, how do they find you, Ian, or how do they find VOS more specifically? Have you got a contact number, a website, something like that?
Yeah, sure. Well, our website, and there's a link on there, which I'll think of the email in a second, but it's www.vosuk.org. So Victor Oscar Sierra Uniform Kilo Oscar Romeo Golf, and our telephone number is a Portsmouth number, which is 02392 731 767. And I think if you were to, on the website you'll see it, but if you were to email VOS, it would be admin ADMIN at vosuk.org. So those are ways of getting in touch with us. But my plea again to people out there that think there could be others that can help, that need our help, then please get the message out to them too. I would just say that there is one sort of we talked about threats and risks of COVID and everything else, but one of the benefits that of course can come out of all this is that we've always been rather geographically constrained because of the model that we have. But right now, and I've had examples of this recently, whilst we're doing things online and whilst we're able to do things that we never thought we would have to do online, it does kind of open things up a little bit. And if you've got certain things that you want to do or join in with or anything like that, it used to be that you were in Portsmouth, Gosport, the regions, or Isle of Wight and all that kind of thing. Well, now it kind of doesn't matter whether you're in Portsmouth or whether you're in Penrith, because we will help people in whatever way we can, whenever we can. But my real message is, somebody, or if you are somebody that needs our help, then please get in touch.
Thank you very much for that, Ian, and thank you for your time today. It's very much appreciated, and I've learned quite a lot, as I often do with these.
Thank you for giving us an opportunity. Thank you.
Well, that was fascinating stuff, Mike. What do you think about that?
Well, firstly, he admitted to be born in Preston, He said, born in Preston, made in the Royal Navy, and then he adapted it to... And I thought, does anyone admit to being born in Preston?
It's perhaps not the most fashionable part of the world. I don't know. I can't. It would be a bit harsh because I've not actually been there. So I'm sure it's lovely.
I do think what Ian's achieved, and as I said before, I do know him. Although we didn't meet until later in both our services. I met him when he was working in the intelligence services, and I was a submariner doing some of the stuff that provided that intelligence. I then met him later when I was working in the Ministry of Defence, and he was with the Serious Organised Crime Agency. And obviously I've now met him in Portsmouth as the Chief Executive of VOS. So I've only known him later in both of our careers. But I have to say he has a very rich service history. And I love the fact that he joined the Navy as a leading seaman and left as a commander. I think that's fantastic.
Yes, and I think that's provided him with great insight for how he can help and support the people that go to VOS for support.
Yeah, he said he can see, because he roughly spent 50% as a rating, 50% as an officer. And he said it gave him the privilege of seeing both sides. And I'm really proud of the Navy. About a third of all the naval officers start life as ratings, and I'm really proud that we promote a third of them to become officers, because I think they provide a very rich vein to our officer corps. I was lucky or unlucky, depending which way you look at it, to join directly as an officer. I haven't had the experience he's had on the lower deck, and I think that he's gained a lot from that, which will allows him to do the job he's doing with the benefit of experience and knowledge that I haven't got.
Yes, and as he said, most of the people they help are ratings or soldiers. They're not, generally speaking, officers, but the vast majority are the junior ranks.
There are certainly some officers I know that could do with help as well, but that's another matter. So he did 30 years in the Navy, and then he's had quite a sort of diverse career since then, both in the private sector, the public sector, and now the third sector. So he really has sort of had a very wide-ranging career, really interesting appointments. And I didn't realise Veterans Outreach Support, VOS, had its roots in the Falklands, which is, of course, part of his backstory as well.
Yes, and neither did I. I think he even said there were some of the clinical staff as well are also ex-Falklands veterans and who may have been flying over their heads whilst they were being attacked by the Argentinians as well. I think the Falklands thing is really important to the sort of story and evolution of VOS, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, and he talked about his involvement in it, which was largely, there were two effectively halves to it. One was the recapture of South Georgia, which he said, in his own words, was one-sided, and led with one exception to lack of loss of life, and was over quite quickly. And then, of course, they got involved in the landings on the islands in San Carlos waters, and all that brought and the sinking of the Belgrano and then the Sheffield, and it got real. He said it got real. Those memories will stay with him for the rest of his life, and I can see why he's so driven to helping VOS in his current role.
Yes, and I must admit, the more I talk to people that have served in the Falklands specifically, the more you realise how close a run thing it was. A few better set fuses on bombs could have resulted in a far different story, couldn't they?
Yeah, there but for the God or go I, or who knows where the trapdoor of life is about to open in front of you, as Bridget said in a previous episode. Two things came across, or lots of things came. It was a very interesting and really well articulated interview that you both did. But I love the fact he talked about team and the way that people work together. He didn't describe himself as a chief executive officer. He described himself as a member of the team, and I think that's right, because it's by working together as a team that you help to deliver a task, a mission, a purpose, a vision. And he gave one of my favourite quotes, which is about when JFK visited NASA in the early 60s after he announced he wanted to put a man on the moon, and he bumped into that janitor who was cleaning, I think, some of the facilities. and asked him what his job was, and he said, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." I think that's in one of the books I contributed to on fit for purpose leadership.
It's a great story, but it might be apocryphal, of course, but it is a great story.
Yeah, but there's an example of vision. If everyone can have that vision and they can work together as a team, then there's lots that you can accomplish together. As he used the word team and together and collaborating a lot during his interview, and obviously it's the way that his mind works, which is always going to be the best way of working, in my humble opinion. So the other thing, you talked about tolerance, and you talked about, if you're going to be in a mess deck, he described his first experience in HMS Antrim as being on a mess deck that's a living space for 65 people, men at that time, and you've got to be pretty tolerant of the other 64 if you want to get on. And those sort of self-disciplines that you learn stand you in stead for the rest of your life, I think.
Yes, just going back to the team point, I think that's really important because for us, as company makers, because we, as I said before, had the privilege of asking lots of people lots of questions. It does mean that we've got to know how organisations work better, what their roles in there, and it makes it easier for us to work together as well. So, providing a team effort to support people in need, this has helped enormously with that process from our point of view, for sure.
Yeah, well, a team is always more powerful when it's working together properly than a series of individuals. And I mean, I'm not a football fan, but that you have a football team full of prima donnas who are on paper the best, skilled people in their position. But if they're not operating together as a team, then they won't succeed. And that seems to happen quite a lot at the national level.
Yes, indeed. But I'm not sure we can solve that. I'm not sure every football team's full of prima donnas, though. Have you heard of Leeds United?
Are they a football team? It's the wrong shaped ball for me. So yeah, I'm sure. I loved also. I mean, we talked a lot about VOS now, and how COVID had affected the way in which VOS operated. Because being a face-to-face organisation and keen on the personal touch, COVID had stripped that off them. But I also observed how quickly they'd adopted technology to help them get around that, and the use of Zoom and other applications are available. I thought was very interesting. It seemed to me they had adapted very quickly.
Yes, and I think it's a recurring theme as well because, as we talked about, people who may not have used these platforms before are now prepared to give it a go out of necessity. And I think some of the positive aspects of technology, hopefully, are here to stay.
Indeed. Yeah, so I think that I'm really pleased you've done an interview with someone in VOS, because I think VOS is one of those organisations that does a huge amount of good, particularly in health and well-being for military veterans. But it actually isn't well known. So anything we can do to help promote VOS and its great work, I think will be. So I hope this podcast goes viral.
Well, you never know. It's the three strands of what they do, which I thought was a great way to explain it, actually, which is around mental health, was about well-being and welfare. And those are the three areas that they focus on to support the military community, because it's not just about veterans, it can be people that are serving or indeed partners thereof.
So there was one thing at the end of your interview that I thought was very powerful. In fact, I think it was probably the most telling thing he said all through the interview. He was relating to a story about how he'd heard somebody that came in for some advice and counselling in a pretty bad place. And the response to that was the words, "We've got you now." This wasn't Ian speaking, this was somebody else. But he'd heard of it. And when he heard of it, he thought, that's incredibly powerful. I'm going to nick that. And we don't ever invent things for new. We often just repurpose them. And he's repurposed this in his own work. And he talks about how powerful it is when people come into VOS. And the first words he says to them is, "We've got you now." I think that's a really, really powerful thing to do.
Yes, it is. I actually know the veteran that he was talking about, and it was for medical support. And it had a very profound effect on him in terms of he'd felt quite isolated and was very much struggling. The physical pain he was in as a result of the injury he had, or the illness, in fact, it was having a profound effect upon him. So to hear those words equally had a profound effect on him, that actually he was now being looked after. So it was quite a relief. And he was very emotional about that, very emotional indeed.
Yeah, a very good friend of mine who you know as well says that there are basically three basic needs the human person, requires, and they are to feel safe, to feel that they belong, and to feel that they matter. And in those words, we have you now. You've definitely got the safe. There's a sense of belonging and also a sense of matter. You've got all three of those. So incredible. I'm going to nick that for myself as well. I think that's a really good one to use.
Share the love, Mike. Share the love.
Yeah, great organisation. So well done you on getting hold of him and conducting that really great and diverse interview you just done.
Thank you very much. And let's look forward to the next time.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more, why not subscribe to the Lockdown podcast? To get in touch with Company of Makers, email us at lockdown@companyofmakers.com.